Liz, great, and Jared. So that's full house. Um, Thanks, everyone. So for purpose of the recording, this is a meeting of the steering, what do we call it? The steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. Sorry, a little glitch there. This is, we've got a couple things to do. The main thing is how do we handle comments coming in on the chapters? Our goal is to prep up the meeting on Monday with some sort of consolidated edits, or at least a focus on the things that we would want the council to pay attention to and a way to deal with all the other ones. We also need to look at an updated agenda for Monday's meeting because now we're going to have the modelers. Um, Liz can confirm this or not, but apparently the modelers will be able to show scenario runs, what they couldn't show on Monday. So that's the plan, at least. So we're reworking that agenda based on that. I'll show you that. So those are the two things we're really trying to do today. So we have materials online. It is frankly daunting, right? If you look at our materials online, it is vast amounts of chapters. And then some pretty significant edits from Julie and Melissa, or Melissa's are less voluminous. So let's just pause for a second here and take stock of how we want to use this time we have. We did set aside 90 minutes. I actually need to end 5 minutes earlier, so let's call it 85. I apologize, you guys can keep going. Our agenda that's online had us looking at the update to the agenda first. My instinct is we can do that, but I'd almost rather jump right into the chapters. Why don't I give you a quick look at how I've reworked that agenda, and then let's do chapters. And is there something else we want to do with it? Let's look back. But I'm happy to do a quick look at that agenda. And we have scheduled public comment for the end of this meeting if you're joining us. So we'll do that as we finish up. Okay. Anything before we get going here? I want to say thanks to everyone who we've all been talking with this last few days after our meeting on Monday, trying to get things tidied up with the priority actions and also all this chapter writing, which is pretty extensive. Okay. We have some minutes from our last meeting. Does anyone need time on that, or would anyone prefer to do that at a subsequent meeting? Anybody need a little more time on those minutes? No? Any concerns with the minutes? Okay, great. Let's treat them as approved. Thanks, everyone. Let's take a quick look at Monday's agenda. I think it's illustrative because when you try to put in a better part of an hour for the modelers, you don't have a lot of time for doing these edits. So it really sort of forces our hand now about like, how do we want to help folks? So here is a revised agenda for Monday. 3 things we're trying to do on it. One is the chapters, discuss and agree on edits to chapters. The other is a presentation of the scenario model. And the final is to look at the edits that have been made based on all the input from Monday's meeting, and just sort of show everybody what those edits look like. We have a little bit of time if we want to work on anything, but it's mostly to say, here how the edits, we asked for edits, here they are. And make sure we're hitting it. That's what we're trying to do with the agenda. I'm going to say, in terms of the order of operations, I initially was thinking that the presentation of the scenario model should go first. But I'm going to shamelessly say that this is entirely to accommodate my schedule. But my daughters eighth grade graduation is 12:30 to 1:30. So I was going to try to let Jane take over from 12:30 to 1:30, and then I'm back in the saddle for 1:35. So that was a very shameless effort for me to be able to duck out to the school, which is just a few blocks away here. So, however, if it feels like, yikes, we actually need those scenario models first, then we'll switch that around and I'll, deal. So just quick look at this agenda. Again, what it allows for is less than an hour and a half on the chapter edits. It's the better part of an hour for the scenarios. And then with the benefit of those scenarios, a final look at our priority actions in top 10. Any quick feedback on this agenda for Monday?
Just that I think my guess is we all support you taking time to be with your kiddo, and that I just appreciate the scenario models being before the priority action conversation, and that's the way it flows. But I'll let others speak up if I disagree.
Cool. It's phenomenal. Okay, great. So if we're good with this, and we know we have like an hour and 20 minutes to do edits, now let's dive into our work around the edits and think about how do we prep up something that's reasonable to do in an hour and 20 minutes. And think about how the work gets done. All right. Great. So we have a number of chapters with edits on them. Julie, you provided a bunch of edits. Sorry, Jared, you got a hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a reflection and ask a process question. So I'm imagining that there's two, maybe more kind of categories that suggested edits may fall into. On the one hand, I imagine that there are edits that are clarifications, that are friendly amendments, that are, additional information that's valuable that the draft chapter authors will be happy to kind of revise, incorporate, add, whatever. And then I imagine there's a second category that are either substantive changes, additions, deletions, which may, there may be disagreement about. And I think the challenge that we likely find ourselves in right now is that the original chapter drafters have probably not had the time, correct me if I'm wrong, to go through and see kind of which are which. And ideally, we'd be in a situation where we spend our time talking about that latter category and not spending time on the former category. I just want to check if folks agree with that. And if that's the case, see what we can do today if we're in that kind of middle space, versus what can and should be done in advance of Monday. I don't,
Yeah.
that would be my question. To what degree have folks been able to go through suggested edits and understand kind of what is, a very straightforward thing or a friendly amendment versus what is more
Substantive.
problematic or contested?
Yeah. No, I love the question, Jared. And I think that's why David's here and why Rich is here. They've started that, and they can say how far they've gotten, but they've started. And so I think what we're going to try, my guess is what we're going to try to do is with David and Rich's help, and is Andrea here too? Because I think Andrea was trying that as well, right? Yeah. And you're working your way through as well. So my suggestion, building off what Jared says, is let's check in with the chapter authors with the work they've done so far and going through. And if there are particular things that are jumping out to chapter authors, let's talk about those now, and see which rise up to having you all say a few things about it and prep up a council conversation about it. If it's like, you know what, this all looks fine, I'm happy to incorporate this stuff, we'll figure it out, then let's not waste our time today with that kind of stuff. That first, actually your first bucket, Jared, of helpful but not particularly substantive. But David and Rich and Andrew have all started. And Liz, thank you. Yes. Joey?
Just building off of Jared's comment and then your follow-up, David, helpful. So I drafted the transportation chapter. I haven't really had time to go through and with a fine-tooth comb. Some of it I do find is like friendly edits. I mean, I lifted a lot, not shockingly, from the original climate action plan because in the transportation sector, not much has changed. So I take some of that as friendly edits, and then some of that seems like more substantive and would, I think, lose some critical context, and has a slightly different lilt than I would feel comfortable with. I guess I just don't, in terms of process, I don't know if we're going to get to a point today to be able to like lay that all out on the table and have new drafts for discussion on Monday. I would worry we won't. And I just don't want to give that short shrift, I guess. And then secondly, I am curious, David, I know you've talked before on like the tweaks and the grammatical stuff that you were thinking that you're gonna hire someone to edit it or whatever. So I'm just curious if you can speak, like, just we're all on the same page of like the vision and substantive work that we need to do, and then what is friendly edits and cleanup and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
So I think there's two kinds of cleanup. One is getting it good enough for everyone on the council to sign off, like, so it's not like a mess, right? And so there's that level of cleanup. And I think that's something that we're going to have to work with chapter authors. And today I want to talk about you all being open to delegating that kind of work to somebody, right? And that somebody could be Jane or it could be somebody, right? That's one layer, and that's just getting over the hurdle of like agreement on the council. Starting in July, there is a contract in place, or almost in place, I think in place, for copy edit support and graphic design and stuff like that. So then they take it and make it look nicer, right? But they will copy edit throughout, but they won't make nice. They'll only work on creating like a plain language version of executive summary or something like that. And there will be editing and, there will be formatting and beautifying and all that, pictures and stories and stuff. But that happens after July or after June 30th. Okay. So as a process for the next few days, what I suggest is today in this meeting, we lean on the chapter authors to help us identify any kind of sticky issues that require a little bit of thought, right? And let's catalog what those are. And if we are able as a steering committee to offer some resolution on them, fabulous. Let's hopefully not pay attention to all the friendly edits that are not particularly substantive. And so we show up Monday with a set of issues, like specific things that we think merit looking at as a full council. And we don't pretend that we're going to go through every single chapter or anything like that on Monday. We're doing like the pre-work of saying, these are the sticky issues. On these ones, we have a recommendation. On these ones, frankly, we didn't get to make a recommendation. And that's what we do Monday. It's almost like a punch list, like how I like to make punch lists. And we can have the documents open, but honestly, we're not getting sucked into the weeds of the details of the documents. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Should we try it? I'd like to try. David's got to go in like 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something. And I'm curious, David, if we wanted to try this process of being able to say, you look across it, you think, all this looks great, but this one or two, four things, I want to flag in terms of edits. I'm wondering if you're able to help us with that. And let's give it a try with the Ag and Eco stuff real quick.
Yeah, happy to. And I think this is a pretty easy one. The one set of comments I have is from Secretary Moore. And I think with a couple of questions, I think all of them are, improvements, language improvements. They're more than just editorial grammatical stuff, but they're very consistent with all the discussions. I don't think they're changing the basic meaning and thrust or stepping into some of the divisive issues that have come up in the debates of that subcommittee. And I don't think any of them are. There's one, this may be just between me and Julie, but others may want to weigh in. But one comment, Julie, was around some of the language. I just had cut and pasted from some prior language that Ryan or Jael or someone had included in some of their narrative. Because as I combined these things, I really didn't get any good, helpful input from Ryan. Like I was just kind of writing this on my own. So there's some things, and one of the things that there's a language I copied that said that, somewhere along the lines of that, let me pull it up exactly. It says, carbon sequestration in agricultural landscapes is the mitigation strategy for agriculture that yields the greatest co-benefits. I think you agree with that language generally. It says, and is easiest and most immediate to implement. And then the part you flagged was, and has the fewest equity concerns in Vermont. And suggested, is there any citations for that? I personally kind of agreed with your comment, which you were pointing out, like what we're hearing from marginalized and disadvantaged communities in the state is not that they think that agriculture is providing the greatest access. So I'm comfortable taking that out. I just wanted to flag that I will try again to flag it for Ryan and see if he wants to disagree or comment on that. But does that seem like the reasonable approach?
Thumbs up from Secretary Moore. Right. I think things that sort of beg for, a citation or, just feel like a little bit out there at this point, probably better to take them out if there's not an easy citation. Maybe Ryan can help with citation, but.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, I'll just frame it for him that way. I say, look, can you give me some citation or clarification? And happy to leave that in. Then the only other comment I had that was kind of a substantive thing I thought that the group might want to consider was Julie suggested in the kind of bullets that summarize the action items. I included summaries of a couple of things that are in the Ag and Ecosystem chapter priority actions category. One was the one we've discussed at some length, thanks to Liz, about, should we discourage or incentivize renewable energy in developed areas versus not developed areas? And the other one is the biomass one, which we've also spent a fair amount of time on. And Julie suggests that those might fit better in the electricity sector narrative, which I'm totally fine with. Feels like a larger question than I can answer.
Secretary Moore, can you just say one more word about that? Because they've sort of been firmly in the zone of the Ag and Ecosystem conversation. I recognize that crossover.
I think they felt awkward relative to the other ones that are sort of teed up in that section, in part because they are less about or as much about electricity or energy generation as they actually are about Ag and Eco. And so understanding that's where those conversations have taken place, but I think very much, in line with the conversation we had at the full council meeting earlier this week, right? There's an intersectionality there that it at least needs to be acknowledged, if not thought about how to organize to best address.
Thanks. Liz Miller?
I'm catching up because this is not a chapter I reviewed before now, meaning today. um, but isn't there going to be a summary of priority actions later in the section under construction such that, because when I read it, I agree with Julie that they feel a little dissonant where they had been. So at a minimum, I would have suggested moving them down. I hadn't thought in flipping through it before hearing your comment that they should move to the other chapter because it's not something we considered. It's not, it wasn't in that body of work. But why do they need to be there at all if they're going to be summarized at the bottom, I guess is my question.
Right, it's whether you highlight something there versus in the list
Yeah.
of priority actions.
Isn't
Yeah,
it just going to be in the list? So, because I agree with you, they're not discussed in the chapter. They're not in the right order in terms of how the chapter is framed, even if you do leave them up top in that first set of bullets. Better, my suggestion, I guess, my quick suggestion, so I definitely could be wrong, is just take them out up there and leave them as something that gets discussed in the priority actions, which of course are going to include things that haven't been explicitly discussed above, which I bet is true of other chapters as well.
yeah. Kelly?
Had a chance to read these very thoroughly, but before this meeting, I got to read. I think Rich was the one who wrote the thermal one, buildings and thermal. Anyway, I thought the sort of like paragraph summary of the different focus, like it sort of summarizes the focus thing without using bullet points. It's a little bit more of a narrative. I feel like that might be a way to discuss those priorities that are in the ag and ecosystems purview that you have here, but without like maybe making those bullets into a little bit more of a narrative so that this more cohesive.
I'm really having a hard time hearing Kelly.
Negative.
I can tell everyone's leaning in. Can you hear me at all now? I don't really know.
I mean,
what's
can
going
hear
on.
you, but it's still leaning in.
Really bad.
Yeah, that's better.
But you're saying, Kelly, you prefer or you would think a more narrative thing rather than the bullets. And if you had
Yeah.
a narrative, it would allow you to sort of give the caveat, like related to the electricity sector are these two things, right?
Yeah. So right. And so arranging the information in a way that maybe isn't the same as what it will be later, but just giving it like a little bit of a snippet of these are the things and putting them in buckets that make sense in a narrative. And then later on, people can look at the specifics in more detail because they'll be in the list of priority actions,
Right.
if that makes sense. Anyway, I thought
Yeah, that's great.
buildings and thermal one did a good job of that.
So what if, let me do this. What if, from more like a clerical standpoint, we translate the bullets into a narrative, right? And when we do the two things around the biomass recommendation and the renewable energy siting recommendation, we give it that little caveat in related to the electricity sector, Would that solve the concern, Julie? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, recognizing we've spent a lot of time talking about both of them, it was more awkward kind of coming across them in that location. So
Okay.
making that connection is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. And so, David, this is the kind of thing, if you wanted to, you could be like, I like that idea. And oh, by the way, Jane, can you go do it? I think or, someone could go do it for you kind of thing at this point. Or if you're up for it, you can do it.
I could use some help with this. I'll do it. I'll just share with you. It's not so much about the time associated with it, but I had this odd kind of personal issue around the biomass one in particular, because there's suggestions made that because I have a client that's involved in getting approval for a biomass plant, that I'm gunning for the biomass provisions. So I've been really scrupulous about trying to make sure I'm just translating what the Ag and Ecosystem Committee said or this broader group has decided. So I really would appreciate someone, Jane would be great to help me just look through it and, they can attest that I'm not trying to diminish or change based on some personal agenda, the content of this.
Thank you for saying that, David. I appreciate you saying that so clearly. Yeah. Um, okay. Anything else, David, on the Ag and Eco stuff?
No, I'm really grateful for Julie's helpful comments, and I'll work to get this to the next version.
Okay, thanks. So for this one, for instance, we have these two changes we're going to make, and we can just signal like, hey, we're making these changes, folks, FYI, right? I feel like this is a council FYI kind of thing. And if someone wants to jump on the council on it, that's fine, but we're not really inviting a lot of feedback. We're saying this seems like the right thing to do. Can we try the rural resilience stuff? And Andrea, can I put you on the spot on this? I don't know how you're feeling about walking through those edits.
Yeah,
and we
I'm
did something
fine
similar
with
to what
that.
David did.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit in an awkward position because I was not the drafter and Chris is not here and will not be here, I guess, is on vacation, which I didn't know. I didn't realize that. So I did go through the edits that I've seen, which only included edits from Julie. So I don't know if anybody else has commented. I would definitely
that we're aware of yet.
appreciate if others can. So Julie's edits, again, just like David said, I think mostly they're helpful. There's nothing in there that I am really, balking at. So yeah, if people have
By the way,
comments now,
Jane's
of course.
Yeah, Jane's chat in there is to say, hey, steering committee, this is it. Like, if you want, this is the moment. Not that we're not going to talk about it on Monday, but it's like we're in it right now. And I recognize it's like super voluminous, the amount of pages. Andrew, are there things that you would say like, I'd have to really work hard to figure out how to incorporate this comment, or this one makes me a little uncomfortable? Is there anything like that?
Nope. I did want to talk about and understand better. We had not included the actions originally, and then conversations ensued, guidance came out, and Chris felt like he was supposed to put the actions in, so he did. And now Julie has suggested that they come out, which is fine. I just think that's a steering committee and council decision across the board of how they want to see that. I mean, it would be nice if the chapters had some consistency in the way that they're framed. But so that's one thing, like, do accept those edits or reject those edits based on what you all want to have it look like. And then, rural resilience took on public health because public health wasn't in the initial climate action plan. And so we formulated recommendations. We took public comment on that. And now there's a health chapter. So I just need some guidance on how that's gonna play out in the actual plan. I don't even know who wrote the public health chapter. I haven't done a cross-reference on the actions or the recommendations with that chapter. So I guess there's just that sort of item that needs to be addressed.
That chapter, Andrea, was written by a couple of staff from VDH, David Grass and Jared Ulmer, and Shayla has been coordinating with them.
Okay.
So in helping try to provide a more plain language version of what had been submitted originally. So probably working through Shayla on that would make the most sense because I think
Okay.
it really is a VDH effort.
Yeah. Okay. And Jared was on the Rural Resilience Subcommittee and on that task group. So it should include what was discussed. I just haven't had a chance to look at that.
Again,
So.
it may be a like theme and variation on the biomass and solar siting conversation where it's
Mhm.
just, it's awkward if we aren't making that explicit connection when we have these two different parts of the report that speak to very similar things in somewhat different ways.
Yeah. And are we, even the table, are the health actions going to remain in the rural resilience table if there's still going to be a table? I don't really have a clear picture of what the new plan will look like versus the old plan, but that's something
So this is the kind of thing where I think it's helpful also to have someone with a pen, who can add a line like public health, this, blah, 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 included in this were public health for the first time. Those recommendations are included in the chapter above or whatever.
Yeah.
And so someone who can look across and just make those links
Yeah.
could be really helpful. Before I
Easy
jump,
upstairs.
before I jump to Jared, oh, sorry, do you have something else?
No,
Andrea?
no, no. Actually, I think that is all
So
Mary.
before I jump to Jared, the issue of whether to include the priority actions in the text, right? I think this was, I believe the guidance, Liz Amler can help me. The guidance was to do what Kelly said, which is a narrative that's not a word for word of the priority actions that speaks to the things that are in the actions, right?
Yeah, so the guidance is to not list out a table of priority actions. That's gonna be, all of the actions are gonna be included at the bottom of the plan. But yeah, the guidance was to focus on the narrative, not a table.
Right. And so what could happen here on this, Andrea, to be consistent? I think if we do like Ag and Eco, what we just talked about is changing that more into narrative. He has already not done a verbatim on that. It's more of a synthesis. So if we took this and made it more of a synthesis narrative of the kinds of things that are in the priority actions, it wouldn't be that hard to do. And again, you could do it or you could delegate if you wanted to. But essentially just say, let's turn that into more of paragraphy talking about the things.
Yeah, and there is some paragraph in there. I just I feel like I need to go back and make sure that the priority actions are represented in the paragraphs that are there. And I think they're a little bit more sort of focused on development and compact settlement and rural and how that impacts resilience. And maybe isn't as broad as it could be. So I can definitely go back and check that again.
Okay. I think that again, if I just share my screen here for a second. So I think this is the right version here, right? Or is this a different version? Sorry. I just linked to this from here.
Oh, I was going off the Julie's edits.
Yeah, I was going to say,
now,
I
so-
think that's where I started from, David, but that doesn't reflect the edits I sent around.
Right.
Okay.
And then I went through.
Sorry about this. It's gonna be a bit of a scroll. Just give me 1 second. So what I wanted to say was these sort of like bullets that are, oh my God, I apologize for the scroll. I shouldn't have shared my screen so early. Here we go. Okay,
Yep.
Here we go. Da-da-da. So those are all bullets about things that have happened, right? And then there's getting into
Yeah.
reactions.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I'd flagged some of them is like this becomes an exercise in an excruciating attention to detail because we've got things in the top 50 that have been massaged a little bit, right? We've got things in the top 10 and trying to repeat them here verbatim starts to feel risky, just in that we're not going to dot our T's and dot
Right.
our I's and cross our T's. And I'm not sure what the value is if they're already in the list of priority actions.
Right. I think it's just
Yeah.
sort of flagging stuff. I'm not seeing the bulleted list of priority actions though in this version.
That's because it's
Because I took it out.
I think as it got converted to a PDF, it's in
Oh, it got
like final markup.
excised. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's fine. And I'm totally fine with not including the list. And it's a good point. They've been they've
Well,
changed a
but
lot. So
I mean, I think to Jane's point in the chat, that's probably a decision we should make like right now if we're going to do that or not. As I say, I saw it as increasingly risky, but if others feel that it's important to have it embedded in the chapters, it just is another level of commitment to proofreading and consistency.
Yeah. Jared, do you want to speak to that point?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that the chapters are aiming to do a couple of things that go beyond the list as a whole. Part of it is to set context for where we are in the rationale for these recommendations. And so my worry would be that if we don't address the priority recommendations, then the chapters would feel like context without a so what, or without a point that they're getting to. And I actually think that in this case, some repetition and consistency would be helpful. I agree with Secretary Moore that there is a risk that there's an additional level of review that will have to happen in terms of making sure that the final language that's in the priority actions list up front will need to be consistent with what is in the chapters, and any changes that have been made by the full council will need to be reflected in both places. But my sense is that the chapters would feel incomplete, and that they wouldn't fully be doing their jobs if we're not including those priority recommendations that relate to that chapter, even if it's in narrative form, not in the bulleted list, which is fine.
Yeah, that I think that's the key, Jared, is like, let's not use the chapters as a place to just chunk in the text, verbatim priority actions. However, we can use the chapters to say, the priority actions include blah, 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 like sort of a narrative thing of what's important. Does that work for everyone to do that? Because I think a lot of the cross-sector mitigation stuff does that, right? It means a little bit of work in ag and eco. It means a little bit of work in rural resilience, but it's essentially just a little bit of summarizing, getting rid of verbatim. Does that sound good? Okay.
Yeah, I guess the only concern there is, like, I get that we don't want kind of a verbatim table or bulleted list, but in summarizing, we also don't want to simplify or change language that could inadvertently make the recommendation different. And so,
Yes,
I think that we want to weave it into a narrative, but we also don't want to change the substance of the guard against changing the substance of the recommendation as we do that.
Fair. Absolutely fair. Yeah. I will say, in addition to that, do not feel like you need to add in lots of extra words because of that, though.
Yeah.
But you don't need to have every little word that we sweat over in the priority actions in the chapter. You need to get at the idea.
It's just that a lot of those words were very carefully.
I know, but they're there.
So
they're there. They're in the list of priority actions. The chapter is context in flicking at ideas. Andrew, is there anything else in the rural resilience that would benefit from or require the steering committee to look at it right now?
I think there just needs to be a cross-check. I would have liked that the members had done that and provided input on what is there and how it relates to the priority actions in their minds. Just so it's not just me like looking at what Chris did in that context, but I think we're at a point where now it has to be just me looking at what Chris did.
Right.
So I
Chris
will
did
do
a
that.
Yeah, he did a whole little thing at the end of the chapter about looking ahead.
Quite a bit of a thing, yeah. But I'm not sure it gets to the breadth of the priority actions, honestly. So I was kind of wondering if people felt like it should be more specific to what the priority actions are or not. But if that review hasn't happened yet, then I'll just have to do it, I think, and present it on Monday, I guess.
Yeah. Secretary Moore, you looked at that full chapter, right? So you would have seen the last page and a half, which is sort of
Now let me just open that.
and others.
It'd be hard to do on the fly here to remember the priority actions and look at 2.5 pages of narrative.
All right.
I need a little more detailed review than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the time to do this on the fly right now. So I encourage folks to look. This is, if we need to do something on Monday, we do it. but it's just a flag, I think, that there is text at the bottom of this one that's kind of like forward-looking and not 100% tightly tied to the priority actions.
Yeah. I'm happy to be well, depending on when you get this done, Andrea. If you get it
It's
done
not
by
going to be
noon
today, Julie.
then never mind, I withdraw.
Yeah, thank you, but
Yep.
there were others too.
Okay.
Okay.
Before we jump, thanks, Andrew. Anything else on your end, Andrew? You're good?
No.
Okay.
Also, thank you.
much. Yeah. Before we jump to cross-sector, we have the cross-cutting issues one. Liz Amler, you've been sort of leading that. There's some feedback on there. We need to add in the new funding recommendation, which doesn't get really a mention in there. Are there other things, Liz Amler, that you would want to sort of flag for the steering committee about cross-cutting issues?
I updated it before this meeting based off Secretary Moore's feedback and adding in that priority action about the funding. I think just one thing that would be helpful, maybe Secretary Moore could just make sure that the way I characterize the using the Clean Water Initiative funding. I just want to make sure that's correct in there. But otherwise, I accepted all those edits and adding that priority action.
Where's the updated version of the chapter?
It's on the
Steering
website.
committee.
I updated the link on the website, but I'll grab it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But otherwise I think it's all set.
Okay, great. Again, thanks everyone for helping with that. All right, should we dive into cross-sector mitigation? Now, this has been a joint effort where Liz Miller and Joey and others have taken written parts, and then Rich, you sort of tried to do a consistent narrative throughout. So there's multiple folks to be helpful here. Rich, when you look at the edits, there's edits from Julie and from Melissa. When you look at those, are there ones that jump out to you, Rich, of like, oof, let's have a conversation about this?
Yeah, so let me just start with a bit of context. I mean, I only received today 2 sets of edits on 5 chapters that I had tried to edit and put together as a common explanation of the cross-sector policies. So I have had very little chance to look across both sets of comments and try to harmonize everything. So let me just begin with the apology that I'm just starting to do this. I did take a few minutes to quickly look at the 2 sets of edits, from Melissa Bailey and from Secretary Moore, and I would say for the most part, it's the usual positive process. We always say at RAP, 2 heads are better than 1, and then 3 heads are better than 2. And right now, that's the world I feel like I'm in. So most of the suggestions again, at quick glance, I found to be helpful. Some were, quite good improvements. And I'm sure that they can, in fact, I've already started to go through and accept changes, create a common draft and accept changes. There are a couple of things I haven't actually done, but that Secretary Moore recommended. For example, she made a recommendation that we refer to the 2024 fuel costs, and I think we should do that in addition to mentioning the price spike in 2022. because it makes the point about volatility a little bit more clear. But we can put in the 2024 fuel costs. And she makes a recommendation that the description of how we deal with cap and invest and complementary policies needs to be redrafted to conform more correctly to the conversations that the council had and the text in the priority recommendations that we are settling on. And I agree with that. I've got a question about and maybe this will just be some back and forth between me and Julie Moore. She recommends deleting a statement about work that's going on about refrigerants, and I just didn't understand why that would be removed, but I'm sure she's got a good explanation for it. The substantive, points of tension, I guess you'd say, that I find in the comments relate to some high-level principles, and maybe they're worth discussing here today. We aren't very far apart on the first. So there's four. I'm gonna name four. The first is that like the recognition that we're all dealing with, that the GWSA has a strong concern or a principal concern with the reduction of emissions. And it also directs us to pay a great deal of attention to equity, fairness, and affordability. And neither one at the complete expense of the other. And I would like to avoid text that seems to state that it's unacceptable to reduce emissions, even if it reduces emissions, and even if it reduces emissions in the long term, that it's unacceptable to raise costs in the short term. We need to be honest that to make investments in, let's just take weatherization, which is a high priority. If we're going to maintain funding for weatherization, then it's going to cost something in the short term to raise the money, even though it's a high priority for both emission reduction and equity. And I want to avoid language that seems to say to the public that we just can't do anything that raises costs in the short term. We state, pretty clearly, repeatedly, that we want to minimize any cost increases for low and moderate income Vermonters, and we want to reduce. But we can't promise that they're going to be zero, even if they save money later. We can do our best to make them as low as possible, but we need to acknowledge there's a trade-off there between perfection and getting a program that actually ultimately saves money. And that's the sort of the second item. The third item is that I think it's important for us to remind Vermonters that we're not only dealing with the emissions reality of the status quo, but we're also dealing with the cost reality of the status quo. And the status quo is expensive. We spend a lot of money on fossil fuels. And it's, I think, really important for us to communicate to the public that, this is a reality that we are pointing out. And the reason we're pointing it out is that the status quo, once I refer to it in the text as the tyranny of the status quo, once the status quo is the status quo, then people sort of say, well, okay, that's just what we're dealing with. And, they don't necessarily pause to reflect on how might we change that to reduce both the emissions and the costs. And so there are a couple places in the text where, we point out that the status quo is really expensive. And I think that text should remain because it's an important part of the message about why we're doing what we're doing. The fourth point is the relationship between our cap and invest recommendation and the reality that we also need complementary policies. And I think we're pretty close to agreement on that. So I'm not really worried. I don't think we have a lot of tension around that. But I think that, again, we need to be clear in telegraphing to the public that, yeah, we're recommending that we look really hard and take steps to join a cap and invest program. But that's not it. That's not like the silver bullet. And so long as the text can be read to be clear on that point, then I think we'll be in good shape. So I could, we could call up text. Now there's probably, I don't know, 8 places in Secretary Moore's edits and maybe an equal number of places in Melissa Bailey's edits that, we could talk about. But those are the 4 main points that I think are underlying the editing disagreements that one could find among these 3 documents.
David, you're on mute.
Just saying thanks, Rich. It's really helpful to lay it out that way. Julie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just a couple of reflections and maybe challenge to not be sure if you're referring to suggestions I made, Rich, or suggestions Melissa made. But I do think in the emissions section of this work, it is appropriate to recognize the Global Warming Solutions Act has a principal concern around emissions reduction. And maybe it's elsewhere in the report that we need to then talk about the fact that it also contemplates some of these resilience investments and happy to look at how to resolve that. I point taken sort of based on where this sits in that larger climate plan. And then at least from my perspective, I think what you're saying about raising costs in the short term to save money in the long term was how I tried to endeavor to edit some of these. I think we have to recognize both that this work can't be done without some short-term costs or revenue raising, and it needs to be forthright in how that gets presented to Vermonters and not focus exclusively on long-term benefits, which are real, but may not reflect, sort of the near-term experience many will have with the policies.
Okay. I mean, I'm in a fond agreement with both of the things you just said. So
That's great. And I think on the complementary policy one, Rich and I worked on language of that paragraph at the bottom of the cap invest, and we have a new version I think is good. And if folks we could look at that for a second. And I wonder, Rich, if it's helpful to sort of use that kind of language in the document. I don't know how it fits with where it is.
I agree that, Secretary Moore correctly pointed out that the language that is in the text that I wrote predated the conversation that we had at the council. And I think we came to a finer, nuanced relationship between cap and invest and complementary policies at the council level. So that should be reflected in this text, and I can do that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just a bit of a mouthful, but I put in the chat is that paragraph. You used to say final note, but that's what it says now. I'm letting folks read the thing in the chat. Jared?
That language is looks generally good to me. The main thing that stands out that reads to me as problematic and not kind of as forthcoming and direct as it should be is the second to last sentence where it says the council also acknowledges the need to explore other complementary policies. We're not going to get these benefits either in terms of the obligated emissions reductions or other associated benefits, including durable energy cost savings, if we just explore complementary policies. They need to be advanced. So, a couple of additional words, explore and advance other complementary policies would be fine, but we're past the point of exploration exercises. We've done a lot of studying and analysis for the past 5 years. We always want to be using the latest information and data and analysis, but I think we would be failing to meet our responsibility to recommend actions if we speak to continued exploration when the evidence from other states and our own analysis shows that actually moving things forward is necessary.
Okay. Just as a point of reference, the reason that word was chosen was because of the way the priority actions are written on those things. It is about getting more data and getting more stuff, right? That's why but I think explore and advance, or as Kelly says, need for other complementary policies. Just take out.
Yep.
Okay. So the reason I throw this in the chat is to say this is the kind of language that we were settling in the cap and invest and could find its way into the chapter, right? In addition to the priority recommendation. Joey?
That makes sense. Just broadly, I mean, I think it's implied in the transportation sector, but I think across the board, we need complementary policies. So I think just broadly.
Oh, I see. Because we could do in the thermal sector, right?
Right. Just process-wise, I mean, I know Jane sent this, earlier today. I too have not had a chance to dig into it substantively. Quick review. I think there's a lot of good. I had not seen Melissa's edits, but I saw Julie's in quick review. I think a lot of them I do take too as friendly amendments and cleaning it up. But again, some of them, and I don't know if we get into this now, and I just haven't wrapped my head around it, but I think it will be meaningful in a final version to make sure that that sort of context that Rich spoke to about, our view of affordability has to recognize the high cost of the status quo. So there were a couple of places that I flagged, and I'm not sure the process to communicate with Rich or communicate with Julie, to sort of, I just want to make sure ideally this is a sort of a blueprint for set of priority actions that is for the legislature, for the executive branch, for Vermonters, and I want to make sure that it tells a full picture of where we're at and why we're putting these recommendations forward and what they hope will deliver. We hope they will deliver in terms of cost effectiveness and benefits as well as greenhouse gas emission reduction. So I guess that's a process point. I just want to make sure that because the words on the page will matter, I want them to tell a full and fair story. And I'm not sure if there are a few substantive concerns, and I would say a few. I think generally, in first glance, I don't like the electric sector, like to Liz's point, I look at that, I read that quickly and I'm like, yep, all that stuff generally makes sense. But in the transportation one in particular, and maybe in the thermal, I would have a couple more substantive questions and potential concerns.
Could you lay out those substantive questions right now?
I mean, not really.
Okay.
I just haven't had a time. I mean, Jane sent this at like 11:30 and I did not expect to have to. So let me see if I can find them, or do we have a process to explore them with others?
So this is what I think we should use the rest of the time with, is how does this all happen now? Right? This is a complicated process we have, quite unlike other processes I've been involved in where there isn't sort of a staff person or two with the pen trying to take in this feedback, like what Rich just laid out there, and then Julie coming in, and then somebody takes that and is like, okay, well, I'll do my best, right? And that's where we get to. I'm feeling like this process kind of needs that, given where we are right now, that there's a little bit of good faith that we put into this, particularly for these chapters, right? We're not talking about the priority actions. We're not talking about the top 10. We're not even talking about the core narrative, which was that preamble text that we're talking about. We're talking about the chapters, right? That maybe there's a touch of good faith that comes in at this point to say, we've said what we'd like to see. Can we delegate someone who has the time to go make those changes? And we're not going to, we're going to assume it's going to be okay, right? And we're all going to read the plan in the end and make sure, there's a final moment there if there's last minute, things that are absolutely tripping you up. But we're kind of at that stage where it's like, let's put out what's concerning and let's assign someone to go fix it.
So to follow up on that, I mean, I can take a stab at going beyond just some initial thoughts and send like suggested track changes, but just looking at the transportation one in particular, I think, Secretary Moore had recommended striking like the sentences that speak to the fact that we remain without a primary regulatory or policy tool to reduce emissions. And that, I had included the sort of addendum from the CAP that we recognize that, one or more of a cap and investor performance-based approach is going to be necessary. So I feel like stuff like that, which is A, we've agreed to already, and B, seems importantly contextual. Those are two in particular I would point to, but I think there are probably more.
All
But
right,
those are
so
both examples.
let's deal with those two quickly. So very specifically, it sounds like there was a suggestion to strike out the language that was in the addendum that talked about, there's two pathways needed or something. I can't remember exactly the language. We can pull it up. Secretary Moore, you pulled it out. Is there a reason to just not include it if it's something we've had in a previous document, I guess is my question.
Trying to get to where we're at.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
We
did
try
a
to
lot
pull it
of
up
this
as well.
this weekend.
I'll try to pull it up as well.
I can drop it in the chat. There's the first one that I mentioned.
Okay, so there's two things you mentioned. One is the strike about Vermont remains without a primary regulatory policy tool.
Right. I mean, I guess we're saying we need additional policies beyond clean cars and clean trucks to get there. And it just feels a little awkward. Otherwise, we should have the same language in the building thermal one, right? Like we have a solution in there. There's a recognition additional policies are needed to accelerate the work. And goes on to say the Climate Council's identified preparing to join a cap and invest as the preferred approach. Like I'm not. I think in part that just felt like a lot of words, and we say it. If you read the whole of the paragraph, it's not denying that there's need for some sort of program.
I mean, I guess it may be that it's included because that relates to the thermal sector as well. So, I mean, maybe it's included as part of the narrative preamble, but I guess I just want to, again, just making it clear for people that it's a program or programs like these are pivotal to the climate action plan adding up, and that we're putting in place a series of sort of steps through, and other complementary policies more broadly. But that seems like fundamental, important context somewhere.
Yes, Joy, if you read not just what I suggested deleting, but what I added later in the paragraph, I think it gets at it. It was really trying to streamline language as much as anything. Like this is,
And I guess that's what I said. Like, I have not read it with a fine tooth
Yeah.
comb because I just got it at like noon. So it's a caveat. I just want to make sure that that's embedded in there somewhere, like that there is really critical context that we have figured together, that I just want to make sure it's translated to the public and policymakers. So happy to review and like send some suggested track changes and edits, which was what my question originally is. Are you and Rich going to work on this? And like we can sort of caveat some of the things that seem important to make sure are somewhere, not necessarily exactly there, to what I think you're saying.
I am out for 10 days after tomorrow at about 11 o'clock. So I'm not going to have another opportunity to really lean into any of this.
I think what I'd love to be put on the table is just this kind of concern, and then have a little bit of faith that we can make the edits needed to address the concern if we've laid it out clearly. So if the issue is, you know, this, let's be clear where we're at in terms of the kinds of tools that we have so far, and what's the progress been made, and what the gaps are, and how these recommendations fill those gaps. If we're all comfortable with that, let's figure out a way to say it that's going to work, right? And similarly with the next thing, that that other text, the only currently known policy options, which there's strong evidence. But Jared, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion process, I understand that David's was kind of a unique position, or David was in a unique position, and therefore it would be helpful to have somebody from A&R staff work on the edits. What I heard Rich to be saying is that he has already begun incorporating the requested edits from Julie and from Melissa, and that Joey was planning to send edits to him. My worry would be that kind of changing who is drafting midstream in terms of missing context of how a chapter has come together. So, I wouldn't want to be dogmatic about like, okay, now we're going to switch every chapter drafting process to staff at A&R. I think that that probably varies based on the chapter and the situation, and that this one that is a little bit more complex, where there's multiple folks sending things in and where the edits have already begun, I would be more, I mean, if Rich can speak for himself, but I feel like he's heard from Julie, he's heard from Joe, he's heard from Melissa. Kelly might have some pieces. I may have some pieces tomorrow. That would give me greater comfort rather than switching midstream kind of the drafting responsibility. That's my feeling on process.
But I'm going to offer a kind of a compromise view here. I think, as I said, I've started to go through this, and it's relatively easy for me to look at the suggested edits and to say, great, approved, accepted, change, and if we just handed the previous text and the two suggested sets of edits to a third person, they would have to be getting back to us and saying, can you accept this one? Can you accept this one? It would be, I think, really inefficient. So my recommendation, and I don't want to do this, my recommendation is that I take a cut at accepting all the changes that from both sets of comments, and trying to merge as best as I can the suggested new text into a single document. And then I'm really, at that point, I mean, I have what I've done in order to keep it sane for myself is highlight in yellow those instances where there's something was suggested that I disagreed with. And it's mostly like, I mean, I appreciate that Secretary Moore in some instances was just trying to delete what felt like extra words, you know. And then occasionally I would think, well, wait a minute, that's a point that I think is really important. Like, this is how much money we spend on heating fuel. But so I put it back in. But I highlighted, or I kept it in, I'll state it differently. I kept it in and then highlighted it in yellow. So if anybody wanted to go through here and say, you know, where did Rich disagree with Julie? You know, it'll be totally transparent. And if out of, you know, 100 suggested changes, there's probably 5 or 6 that are going to be in yellow. At that point, I'm happy to hand the document to David Plum or to Jane and say, you know, try to resolve this, or let Rich and Julie, you know, talk through them. But that'll be, you know, you're going to be away for days, so it's not going to happen right away. But the point is, I think it's more efficient to just whittle it down to the things that are going to be in highlighted yellow and then talk about those if we feel like we have to. And they're not earth-shattering. I mean, they're questions of, I don't know, what you might call emphasis more than anything else. You know, I have a sentence, I'll just give you one example. I have a sentence that said, the fossil status quo, where Vermonters routinely spend around $1 billion each year on heating fuels, is part of the state's housing affordability problem. I'm essentially making the point that, you know, housing affordability is, you know, how do you say it? There are a lot of factors that drive housing affordability. Property taxes is one, and mortgage payments is one, and the cost of heating is one. And so I say it's part of the problem. And I think it's, again, this is a statement about the status quo that I think is important to remind people that we're not just in the climate plan trying to make life harder for people. We're trying to solve a problem of high costs. So I put the sentence back in. I don't know, you know, after having this conversation, Secretary Moore might say, yeah, it's fine, leave it in. I don't know what she'd say. I don't think, but it's a single sentence and we could argue about it if we want.
Right. Okay. Julie?
I want to be clear. These are my suggested edits. I don't harbor any illusions that people are just going to take them wholesale and be done. So I think what Rich is suggesting makes a lot of sense. I would also encourage, to the extent folks have the capacity to do it, somebody else should read all of the chapters. It doesn't hang together. Like, some of the comments I've made are an intention to try to like hang together and have, whether it's in the preamble or other places, some of these arguments taken up, as opposed to having them be repeated in individual chapters. Or just recognizing that they have broader application, you know, to one of the ones Joey raised than just the transportation space. And it was hours of work. I'm not going to try to downplay the fact that this is a significant undertaking, but I also feel like it's going to be challenging for folks to review all of or have the context I was bringing to my review, absent having read all of the chapters themselves. And so just encourage that to the extent people can make time.
Thanks, Julie.
I just have to chime in and applaud your diligence to have done that. I mean, it is a lot of work.
Yeah. So in our final few minutes we have, let's be quite concrete then about what's going to happen next on these different chapters. And we haven't even talked about a lot of other introductory chapters and things like that. Um, um, so on the cross-sector mitigation, it sounds like, Rich, you're willing to put a little time into this. I guess my question to you, Rich, is will we be ready with like a punch list of things we want to put in front of the council on Monday to say, you know, in the kind of the way you did your 4 substantive things, Joey put in a couple ideas like, hey, I really want these things in there. Like, I'm happy to make a punch list of stuff like that. And, you know, particularly if we had like a lot of stuff we had agreement here, some of the stuff we haven't managed to actually work through. But I feel like, Rich, you got a nod from Julie about like, yeah, actually, let's be forthright about things that have some upfront cost but save you money in the long term. Right? So with that, you can go in and edit and
Yeah,
fix that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
There's other things that maybe you're like, actually, I don't know how to fix this.
I suspect that there's agreement in substance on all of the 4 points that I raised.
Yeah.
I mean, Secretary Moore also agreed that, you know, the GWSA, and she had edited quite nicely the bit that states that the leading aim of the GWSA is emission reduction. And that, you know, that's a concrete statement that we can agree to. I don't think so. Here's a question, David.
Yeah.
If we can create a punch list of, you know, that's stated in terms of, I don't know how to say it, in policy terms, as opposed to let's fight over the wordsmithing of a
Correct.
paragraph, then I think the council will be better able to decide, yeah, I agree with that, or I don't agree with that. Now, if we need a concrete sentence in order to like illustrate the point, then fine, we can pull out something from the text. But I just don't think it's going to be productive. We don't have enough time to wordsmith it.
Yeah. And what I'd love to show up to the meeting with is sort of a list of things like, hey, in the steering committee, we agreed to this. We're still working on how to do it here. Any quick input on that from the council? Like, that's the kind of conversation I'm imagining Monday.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that'll be more productive.
Great. Jane, you got your hand up?
Oh yeah, I volunteered Jane to take it to take it after we massage these drafts. Or you, David. I volunteered both of you.
Yeah. Jane, what do you think? Hang on one second. We don't have any audio from you.
You got me now? Yeah, okay. David, I think what you're talking about is really great, but I guess I just want to propose to you and the steering committee, just thinking through process for the chapters, not only for Monday, but also with an eye ahead to the following week. Because, you know, on Monday, there's still some serious chapters out there, like the executive summary, the scientific underpinning chapter, the priority action chapter. Those are all coming for the following Monday, and I don't anticipate many of them will actually be drafted and online very early for that Monday, understanding that the modeling's still happening. I'm not sure the space, Julie, you and Jared, if you want to comment on the priority action chapter and if that's really going to be the preamble language now, or if there's more work to do on what you're saying about the actions there. But I guess I feel like a productive conversation is with the whole council, and is an acknowledgement of this content and how we're capacitizing this conflict resolution between divergent opinions in small groups, and some reflection on tone and where compromise was made, and sort of like high level, like, are we getting the right balance for the council to feel comfortable as a whole body, either on the 16th or the 23rd, because it's hard to see the value of going through point by point on Monday when there's still quite a bit to come also. So I'm just trying to help you all think through yes, Monday, but what happens the following Monday too, when there's still quite a bit more to read and not a lot of time?
Great question. Kelly?
I guess what I'm thinking about is it would be great if everybody went through with a, a red pen or whatever, a blue pen, but went through with some edits of like, this is confusing, I suggest this. But anything we bring to the council meeting on Monday and then the following council meeting, I feel like that would be something where it's like, I feel like you mischaracterized the intent of this thing, or like, I don't think the whole council would agree on this way that you wrote this paragraph. And it's more about the message and less about any specific thing. And so I think that's where Secretary Moore was providing some of these things, like saying, oh, I think this might actually not be the message we want to send. And then the council can discuss that. Is that the message we want to send? And how can we, as like we've been doing with the individual priority actions, but making sure that these chapters, because I think the members of the public are probably going to read the chapters and not necessarily go to the actions. Like if I'm going to pick something up, I might read the chapter because it's a lot more engaging than a bullet pointed list. And so make sure the chapter actually reflects what we said in those list of actions and that we agree with that. So it's actually, I feel like it's really important that we agree with the overall message and that it reflects what we believe as a council roughly. That we're not one person. But I think that's where I would try to have people focus their attention. But hopefully also do those little edits of like, well, that was confusing the way you worded that or something, Those sorts of things are helpful, but not in a public meeting, like behind the scenes, just be like, hey, Jared, that was confusing. Fix that.
Right.
Sorry to single you out, Jared.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna need to get pulled away in like about 60 seconds, unfortunately. I feel like for Monday, Rich, if you can make progress and you and I can ping back and forth quickly about what is it you want to put on the table in terms of those kind of like more policy statement kind of things, like, hey, this is what we're working on. That would be great. With Ag and Eco and with and Joey, same thing. With Ag and Eco cross-cutting in rural, honestly, I feel like it's, steering committee looked at it. They're making some edits. It's going in the right direction. That's all you need to know, council. Folks want to chime in, that's fine. Kelly, I like the way you frame it of like, hey, we're looking at directionally here. We're kind of past the point of like nits and things like that. So that would be my suggestion for Monday. And then for the next period, I think the executive summary is very important. The chapter that Jared and Julie are in charge of is essentially the preamble and can be turned into a narrative, is very important. We've already looked at that. We spent some time on it. Jared, over to you, and then I'm going to jump off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know it's already been communicated, but just given the timeline that we're on, I wonder if there's a reminder message that goes out from the Climate Action Office to the council ahead of Monday to encourage, underlining this point that for these chapters, we're trying to raise and resolve any concerns or suggested edits on Monday, because then we will have additional chapters and finalization to do in the week after. I just don't want to run into a situation where counselors are saying on Monday, and I'm behind on this too. I'm kind of in the same place Kelly is. I've read part of it, but I haven't finished, and I'm planning to finish it by Monday. But I wouldn't want somebody to think that the opportunity to review those chapters is after next Monday rather than before.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Folks, I'm going to jump. That sounds really good. If you need to hang out for a moment more, feel free. I unfortunately just really need to go. Thank you. We'll see you on Monday. Rich will be in touch, and others in touch. Jared, if you want to take a look at Julie's edits on the preamble language, that would be really helpful. That's over email.
So comments to Liz and Joey, if you have reconciliation documents that you care to to do on electricity and transportation, just send them to me so I don't duplicate your work.
Yeah. Thank you. I
Yeah,
will definitely.
what I saw is fine. So,
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, and the electric one, I didn't have any comments either. I read that one.
Okay.
And so I will send you some thoughts on the transportation one, and if I don't suggest any edits, I think it's generally
Okay.
all
I-
fine. Most of
I
it seems
just-
fine.
No need to duplicate if you're already taking care of it.
Before
Thanks.
folks leave, I have to jump to a Just Transitions meeting. But before folks leave, I'll be sending out an email. We're hoping to get anybody's like 1 or 2 sentences about how you incorporated public comment into our work. So I'll send an email, but please, think about it. It doesn't have to be a lot, and we hope to get it soon because that'll be in the public engagement chapter. So you'll see an email from me, but just wanted to put in a plug while we're still here.
Thanks, Kelly.
Kelly.
Thanks, everybody.
It's great. All right.